Welcome everyone. My name is Serkan Yılmaz. I am the president of the Turkish Society, and uh, thank you all for taking your valuable time to joining us today for the Ottoman Empire, the Multiculturalism and Ottoman Heritage panel. Uh, just one second. Yes, we hope that this event can help to provide some understanding on the topic as well as broaden your existing knowledge. The panel and discussion should last around 45 minutes, and afterwards we will have a Q&A session for 15 minutes. During the panel, if you have any questions, you can write them down on the chat. We will be also putting a Mentimeter website. If you want to post your questions anonymously, you can just pop them up there as well. Also, during the Q&A session, you can just directly ask your questions by raising your hand. And that'll be it. From our events director, Daphne will briefly introduce our speakers now. Hope you all enjoy this event.
Hello, everyone. I'm the events director of the Society, and I would like to thank you all for coming. I would like to especially thank Dr. Causevic and Dr. Ozlu for accepting to join us today and to share their valuable insights. Dr. Causevic is the co-chair of the Center for Ottoman Studies and the Reader in Marketing and Cultural Studies from SOAS, University of London. And Dr. Ozlu is a Chevening Visiting Fellow at Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and also an architectural and cultural historian. They will highlight the Ottoman legacy in current displays, museums, and culture, as well as the interpretation of Ottoman heritage in Europe through emphasizing multiculturalism. The panel will be led by our chair, Efe Özkan, who is also a part of the UCL Turkish Society committee. And just before we go, I would like to ask everyone for the social media purposes to maybe turn their cameras on so that we can take a wholesome picture together, if that's okay. Just a second. So I'll be counting down from 3. Wait, would it be possible for you to, Serkan, to stop sharing your screen for a second so that I can see the full picture? Okay, perfect. So 3, 2, 1. And for the other page as well. 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much, guys. So now I'll just leave the floor to our speakers, and thank you very much for coming.
Am I the first speaker? I need to unmute myself. So let me first share my screen as it goes. Yes, this is the one. You can see the screen, I hope. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me, Daphne, and let's see how it goes. I think I'm the only one who is not Turkish in this session, so but my ancestors were probably a part of the Ottoman Empire a long time ago. Good evening, everyone. My name is Senija, and what I'm supposed to say for this presentation, let's go forward. The project is about cultural heritage. Basically, what I'm going to speak today about is to look at Ottoman multiculturalism, if we can call it that way, through the lens of cultural heritage in Europe. I have done research in the Middle East as well, in the MENA region, particularly focusing on Oman. But in this specific presentation, I would particularly focus on Western Balkans, on the countries of Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and Albania. Why we have chosen those three countries is particularly because in other countries in the region, in the West Balkan region, there is Ottoman heritage. However, it is not that much. It is there, but it is not perceived as being there. However, in these three countries, it has become quite an attraction for the visitors from the area to come and visit those heritage sites. They tell the story about the history. So we are talking about multiculturalism through the lens of material heritage of the heritage sites and museum, the museums. In that sense, and I have also done quite a lot on Orientalism and secluded Orientalism as this part of is the other of Europe, has always been presented as such. It is a part of the Europe and a part of the European Union to a certain extent. However, it is always understood as being something else, something the other. It's not Orient, but because it's in close proximity, but it's kind of a subliminal in a sense. So this is like this kind of a liminal space, which through which we have done this research. The research has been done by my colleague from Scotland, Dr. Derek Bryce, and myself. We have done this research in the last 10 years, possibly. We have started 10 years ago, and we both got pretty much motivated to do this research throughout our PhDs. We have had a bit of a different focus when we were doing our PhD research, but we have seen around Ottoman heritage and visitation of to the Ottoman heritage sites, and so we were like, maybe for a postdoc or some further research, we can do something on Ottoman heritage in this particular area. So this is I put here the papers which Derek and myself has written in the last couple of years, so which really motivated us and which feel like a grounding for this particular research context. And before I go any further, I would ask Serkan or Efe or Daphne just to tell me when I have 2 more minutes left. Basically, how do we start with this topic? So what do we consider as being Europe? So we are going from the Renaissance period, Christendom, European Christendom, through the Enlightenment to the focus of the European Union. But there is one big part which is missing in this context of when we try to talk about European Union and Europe in general, and this is 500 years of Ottoman Empire, which has been a part of the European Union and Europe, the idea of Europe in general, but has been somehow cleansed from the narrative of what is Europe. So this was the main idea from which we have started to ground this argument, and what inspired us for this particular research is, of course, Edward Said's Orientalism, where we have seen that there has not been so much work in Orientalism which have dealt with Ottoman Empire. It was more with the Middle East than with Ottoman Empire. So in that sense, we have added the context of Ottoman Empire as well. Then imagining the Balkans from Maria Todorova, and the Empire of Difference from the book written in 2008 by Karen Barkey, the comparative perspective between Ottoman Empire and other colonial powers in that time. So in that case, we have started with our research context of this particular research, and this has been Balkans. Particularly, we focused on Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia, and Albania. So just quickly to go through this particular slide, and this is for you to see. I got something on chat. Oh, no, nothing for me.
It is just a reminder for if you have questions, you can just go to
Yeah.
meds.com to ask
Good.
them.
Good.
Right.
So, no worries. I thought it's like we can't hear you or something like that. So I usually have that from my students as like, Senija, we can't hear you. So let's go back to the point. So why am I putting this particular map? Because it adds to complexity of the conquests of the Ottoman Empire. So basically, it was first that it was Europe which has been conquered first. From Europe, it went further to the Middle East. So in that sense, for the countries which are in the Middle East and in North Africa, that looked like a conquest from the West. So we have to see, thinking about this self-reference criterion and this particular Western-centric view of the world. Well, it wasn't for everyone that it was a conquest from the East, as it looked for the European Union and Europe in general, for current European Union, but European continent, what I meant. So for Middle East and for North Africa, it was basically a conquest from the West. But again, so we have to see how geographically we can talk about this particular the empire. And the next slide is going back to our focus of research. So these are the historic Ottoman heritage sites which have been visited during the fieldwork. One of the most famous one is UNESCO World Heritage Site, the old bridge in Mostar, which has been built by one of the students of Mimar Sinan, Hayruddin, who was commissioned to build this particular bridge. And also it has quite a lot of relevance to the recent war in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the early 90s. So that's why we have spent quite a lot of time talking about the bridge. So we as you can see, there are other sites in Albania and in North Macedonia which we have visited. Some of those sites are secular by their nature, and some of them are religious sites like mosques and churches which we have visited, and the museums which are located in the Jewish synagogues, in the Orthodox churches churches, and the museums, which are and heritage sites, which are more like a secular sites. And these are like, we have done 21 interviews with the custodians of the museums, and with those who are explaining the sites. Talking about the first one is the Mostar Bridge, the old bridge in Mostar, which has been rebuilt after a big after it was bombed during the war for Bosnian independence in early 90s, and. In that sense, it has been rebuilt, and lot of by the UNESCO and by Turkey as well. The funds from TICA as well have been. I don't think so. That was called TICA at the time, but it's been rebuilt with a great help from Turkey in 2004. The site is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and why am I talking pretty much about this site? Although it's the site which was built during the Ottoman times in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the bridge is the symbol of the city, and has always been a symbol of a city. And that bridge was destroyed, many people in the city said, like, well, it looked like it was like you're losing a child. That was the kind of how people felt when you're losing somebody you love. They felt that they lost their soul by destroying this particular bridge. In that sense, when we were observing the tour with the foreign tour, which the tour guide took the foreign tourists to that particular tour to see the bridge and to talk about the bridge, and the tour guide was always talking about Turkish Empire, Turkish Empire, Turkish Empire. So then afterwards, when we talked about like, why do you call it Turkish? It was Ottoman Empire, and like Turkey was an important nation, part of the Ottoman Empire, but it was in that sense, when you say in that sense, like a Turkish Empire to the Western or the tourists who don't know much about the history, it seems that it's just a conquest. It's a colonial conquest. However, when you say Ottoman Empire, you can explain further that many people who were basically locals in all those countries which were conquered, like Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia, they have actually played quite an important part within the empire, and they were actually the conqueror and the conquered at the same time, all those lands. So it's a very complex and very liminal landscape to talk about. She basically said the following point. Well, I don't have time. There is a tour which I have to do, and I have to spend 10 minutes on the bridge. How can I explain all of that? I can't do it. Like, so I'm just cutting the corners. I'm just going straight to the point. And if I say Ottoman Empire, it was look at like, what is Ottoman Empire? If I say Turkish Empire, it's so easy to everyone knows Turkey. Turkey was here. Fine, Mimar Sinan is quite somebody people know. So I'm just cutting it because I don't have time. So again, the time is the essence. So to quote Baudrillard, we are always talking about a free time, and when people go for tours, it's a kind of a free time. But well, when we talk a bit in more Baudrillard's terms, like is there that time really free? And what does it mean? The time is really limited to very short, very short period. So it's not possible to go and delve into the context more, because the context is complex. You have the conquest and the conqueror and conquered in one point, at one point, in one territory. You're both, if you have been conquered by the Ottoman Empire. So another point, another one where we see the same is another national monument called Muslibegovic House, which is also a hotel, and it says Ottoman in the brackets Turkish period, so that the visitors can understand what Ottoman means. It's a kind of a translation for the visitors, and also interchangeably, the term Ottoman and Turkish has been used locally as well, by the locals as well, for the same reason. It's kind of considered as being almost like a synonymous. So then we went, I'll speak about Sarajevo. This is on my left side is a part of Gazi Husrev Bey's mosque, and on the front as well. This is like this is the home of the first public toilet in Europe, and that's something what the tour guides really like to talk to say to tourists, quite to highlight that particular point. And here in Sarajevo, there was also quite an interesting point to mention when it comes to presentation of this particular of this particular site, is that let me just go to this particular site. Again, the way how it's presented is that it is kind of a West meets the East. And somehow it has been presented not in syncrasy as how it evolved to be, depending on which sultan runs and which and who is sent to deal with the province locally. But it has, and this is how it's presented by the visitors, by the visitors as well, as a kind of a binary. So in a kind of a binary binary context as it goes. So when it comes to religious monuments, many tourists are really scared because of the media, the way how it's how this particular religion has been perceived by the media, as has been reported with this in the media. And that's why the tourists use this moment in order to talk more about tolerancy, about multiculturalism within the city context, and similar stories.
Senija,
So
if I might interject
another interesting,
sorry to interrupt, but just for everyone to know as well, I'm FA, I'm welfare officer of Turkish Society at UCL, and I'm doing no moderation for this talk. And just because you're coming close to the end of your allocated time, I wanted to ask you a bit of a question. I thought there was kind of a recurring theme in what you're talking about. You're mostly talking about, there's some sort of a media, I don't want to say propaganda, maybe that's too hard of a word, but kind of a scaring tourists and scaring the general populations about, Islam or religion, or even the word Ottoman. Do you think this is, after the Balkans gain independence from the Ottomans and gain independence, from Yugoslavia? Do you think this is some sort of historical revisionism at work, kind of, trying to, not necessarily deny what went on, or maybe less highlighted and trying to highlight their own identity as a sovereign Balkan nation rather than the Ottoman one?
There is a point on talking about this about that as well. However, like for many tourists who come to visit Bosnia, for them it is like the country didn't exist before 1991. And so it's quite important for the museum custodians and the locals who are welcoming the visitors to speak about heritage in a bit more complex terms, to speak about the syncretism of the religions which have actually survived next to one another, and not just survived but thrived in this particular area, in this particular point. So in that sense, that's both this kind of a story, this kind of a narrative is both the co-creation from external external context, but also internally built up. So it's both external and internal pressures to make this kind of a story. What is also quite interesting, the syncretism which is really highlighted in all those tours is, for instance, this is a Christian Orthodox house. This is the house of really rich tradesman, Mr. Despic in Sarajevo. He's an Orthodox, but his house is really decorated in a very Oriental way. And why is that so? It's because that was fashionable in that time. That was the most expensive kind of a furniture you can get, and it was the most fashionable furniture you can get. So you were kind of presented like, wow, look at this. Somebody was saying like, well, it's like today going into somebody's house and you see plasma TV instead of like this kind of a big TV screens, which most of the modern people, modern housings are having. So in that way, this was the way. So it wasn't that much of a grounded in any kind of a religious style, but more about wanted to be seen as a rich man who can afford this kind of a furniture, as in a sense. So and this is another one. I'm not going to talk about.
I'm afraid, Senija, to kind of interject on your point in your slide, but I think we've come kind of towards, and I think we've come to a point that I want to kind of shift the talk towards Nilay, and I think she has some good points about this artifacts or / household objects being not just religious but as a function of the house and kind of an accepted culture. And I want to kind of take that towards the Topkapı Palace, as your presentation will be about. And I think there's some good link to it, and I think it's a good point that we can transition to maybe your slides if you're ready.
So may I just add one more?
You, of course, after you sum up.
So in that sense, this is the Muslim house, and this is a Christian house. They look pretty much similar. And this has been presented as such. This kind of a syncretism was the main point which has been presented throughout Sarajevo. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries.
I think it will tie in very nicely with our upcoming presentation. So if we can now switch the presentations to give the word to, of course, Dr. Nilay as well.
All
And
right.
now, with your presentation, of course, I will now give you the floor. And
My presentation is a bit longer, so feel free to, interrupt me if it's longer than expected. Thanks for having me. Shall I just start and go on? I think the time is quite limited.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to continue off from Senia's presentation.
Yeah, I was eager to to listen to the whole presentation and learn about their findings, because it was so interesting, the perception of the tourists and the tour guides of the Ottoman heritage. But today I'll be talking about how the Ottomans displayed themselves, how do they self-represented the empire to the foreigners coming to the empire. But Daphne also asked me to talk about a little bit about the Topkapı Palace as well. So my presentation will be in two parts. I'll be talking about the palace first, and then the display of the collections. But let me start with a disclaimer. I will not be talking about the libidinous sultans, ambitious courtiers, or beautiful concubines as advertised, but instead I'll give a presentation on the Ottoman royal collections and their display during the 19th century. However, I believe this advert is a great example of how rooted the Orientalist discourses are, even in our contemporary society. Seraglio, or the Sarai of the Grand Seigneur, has always been associated with eroticism, exotism, mystery, lush, and luxury. Therefore, the European tourist visiting the Seraglio in the 19th century, during the heyday of Orientalism, was very much hoping to experience this Oriental lust and exotic luxury, and left the palace somehow disappointed after seeing what Ottomans had displayed for them. So I sincerely hope that you won't be disappointed with my kind of academic presentation today. All right, as you might already know, the Topkapı Palace was built by the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II after the conquest of Constantinople at the tip of the Seraglio during the second half of the 15th century, and it remained as the main seat of the Ottoman Empire for more than 4 centuries. The Seraglio, surrounded by the Golden Horn, the Bosphorus, and the Sea of Marmara, and hidden behind high walls and evergreen cypress trees, had always been a mystery for Europeans. We see numerous depictions of the palace from Pera, in which the foreign embassies were located. For example, here is a gaze towards Istanbul and Seraglio from the hills of Pera across from the Golden Horn. So, Europeans look and wonder, what kind of a palace is this? Where is the Sultan? Where is his harem? Where are the legendary riches of the Oriental despot hidden? Do they strangle young women and drop their dead bodies into Bosphorus? What about the black eunuchs? Are they really sexually disabled? How many concubines does the Sultan own? What about his boy slaves? Well, unfortunately, I will not be able to answer these questions. I perhaps need a series of seminars to unravel each mystery associated with the palace. But today I'll try to present very briefly the architecture configuration of the palace. As you can see, it is composed of outer gardens and 3 consecutive courtyards, all connected to each other through monumental gates. So here you can see the portals to each court, and in fact the palace is composed on 2 main parts, Birun and Enderun, the outer sections and the inner sections. Enderun is the part where the Sultan lived. And this is the imperial gate of the palace. It is the grand entrance to the imperial complex, and it overlooks to the main Friday mosque of the city, Hagia Sophia. So the grand portal was placed on the imperial walls, Sur Sultani, that Fatih has erected, creating a seclusion for the palace and the divine ruler. So you can see the first court, the Alay Meydan of the palace. It was dedicated for service functions such as depots, armory, hospitals, bakery, and workshops for palace artisans. So it's of a semi-public character, so anyone could have access to this courtyard if it's necessary. This is the second courtyard, the Divan Meydanı, and the palace proper starts with the middle gate, with this courtyard. There's the council hall, imperial stables, and the imperial kitchens, which also represented the enormous wealth and generosity of the Sultan. A 16th century Ottoman illustrated manuscript, Hünername, depicts the vibrant character of the second court, where state affairs were held. This is the administrative and ceremonial heart of the palace. On the left, you can see the council hall, namely the divan. It is where the ruling elite meet under the direction of the Grand Vizier. And Ottoman sultans traditionally did not attend these council meetings, but they could listen to these meetings from a chamber inside the Tower of Justice. Here we can see Süleyman, for example, secretly listening to the council meeting. But most importantly, the second courtyard is a ceremonial venue in which the most significant state ceremonies, such as accessions, Bayram greetings, funerals, were held in ultimate silence, dignity, and grandeur. Moreover, audiences constituted an important aspect of the court ritual, and foreign envoys, diplomatic envoys, were hosted at the divan before seeing the Sultan at the throne room. So here you can see a procession of a diplomatic envoy and from the second court towards the throne room, which is located in the third court. So they were trying to impress, humiliate, and flatter the foreigners, all at the same time during these audience ceremonies. The Gate of Felicity is a symbolic threshold between the Birun and Enderun sections of the palace, a holy gate separating the worldly and the sublime, the Sultan and his subjects. The gate was guarded by the white eunuchs, who were also in charge of the education of the palace pages, namely İçoğlanı. No living soul could pass through this gate without the Sultan's permission. And the third court, Enderun Humayun, or the inner palace, is the house of the Ottoman dynastic family. It is composed of the Enderun and harem and the private pleasure gardens and kiosks of the ruler, as you can see in this illustrated manuscript. So on the left of the page, you can see the harem part, which is added to the palace later on, attached to the Enderun court. Experts state that there was a small harem in the initial configuration of the Topkapı Palace, and the imperial family and their female servants lived in the old palace, Saray Atik, at Beyazıt. And Topkapı Palace was designed for the Sultan to engage with state affairs and to live with his male servants in the Enderun. However, by the 16th century, Süleyman's wife, notorious Roxelane or Hürrem Sultan, managed to move her household from Beyazıt to the Topkapı Palace, and from this date on, the imperial women started living here. Therefore, the harem of the palace developed gradually within centuries without any pre-configured planning. I believe this picture reflects the complexity of the harem. Yes, the harem is a super complex and grift structure. It is not only a labyrinth-like composition of chambers, wards, baths, courtyards, corridors, dens, gardens, pools, and halls, but it also constituted an extremely hierarchical imperial protocol that was organized under the direction of the Queen Mother, the Valide Sultan. The sexuality of the Sultan and his reproduction, securing the dynasty continuity, was of extreme importance and personally managed by the Queen Mother. It was, of course, a space of luxury, lust, conspiracy, and hedonism and competition, like all royal courts. But the Ottoman harem was also defined as, quote unquote, school for young women, in which slave girls were trained and later married to high ranking Ottoman dignitaries. Having no aristocracy, the Ottomans created a royal elite in the confinement of the Topkapı Palace. Young slave boys and girls, mostly of Christian or Circassian backgrounds, went through a strict and long training and raised as loyal servants slash slaves of the Sultan and eventually became part of the Ottoman ruling system. In this context, the Enderun court, the third courtyard of the palace, was of crucial importance. It was where the Sultan lived with his male household. The Enderun pages were mostly selected from Christian boys from the Balkans and known as converts, devşirme in Turkish. After an initial training, the selected boys were brought to the Enderun court, and under the governance of the white eunuchs, they received a long and tough training. After many years of serving the Sultan at different posts, the pages eventually graduate and appointed as statesmen or governors to the provinces. At some point, the most successful ones could return to the Topkapı Palace as viziers or grand viziers and run the state, but this time from the second court. The training of the palace pages started at the small chamber, here you can see it, then continued at the large chamber. After this initial training, they were promoted to the Seferli wards, in charge of Sultan's clothes and personal hygiene. The Kilerli Corps were responsible for the nourriture of the Sultan, and Treasury Corps were in charge of his personal treasury. And finally, the most prestigious of all the pages were the Hasodalılar, or the privy pages, who served and assisted the ruler at all times. In this map, the two corners of the Enderun were dedicated for the personal use of the Sultan, and today I'll be talking about these two units, the Fatih Kiosk and the Hasoda, or the Imperial Treasury and the Privy Chamber, if my time permits. So let's have a look at these two collections or two chambers built by Mehmet II at two corners of the Enderun. And I'll show again because the palace is so complex for the ones who are not familiar with it. And by the 19th century, these pavilions and collections within were being visited by diverse audiences, and different display techniques were adopted that conveyed multiple narratives of modernity, tradition, heritage, dynastic continuity, and authority. So the Fatih Kiosk was built by Mehmet II at the southern corner of the third court, overlooking the Sea of Marmara. The structure was composed of 4 units on the ground level and several basement chambers. Fatih Kiosk was built for Sultan's private use, but also to preserve his personal treasures. In this sublime pavilion, the sovereign could rest, spend time, have guests, and also contemplate his invaluable treasury collection, ranging from relics to erotica, from jewelry to paintings, from manuscripts to clothing. However, within centuries, the kiosk lost its residential function and transformed into a treasury depot and started being referred as the inner treasury. After the abandonment of the palace by the imperial family during the 19th century, the Topkapı Palace and its renowned treasury finally opened for foreign visits, and it was first visited by the ambassadors of the great forces, France, Russia, England, and later for esteemed European visitors. Eventually, by the last quarter of the 19th century, any Western tourist who can afford to pay the entrance fee could have access to the imperial treasury. Here you can see some...
I'm very sorry once again to
Yeah.
interject in yours. At this point, I would like to ask a question about exactly what you were talking about, saying that, for example, if we say in 1832, during the Treaty of Istanbul, when France and England and Russia came to Istanbul to sign this treaty, and when they come to Topkapı Palace, especially for the European ambassadors, how European would they see Topkapı Palace, or how would they, architecturally and, as its use, how European would you consider this palace to its contemporaries of the time in, for example, Austria, which is, a closely linked empire to the Ottomans?
It's a very good question, Efe, but maybe let me complete my presentation because I'm coming to the perceptions of the Europeans, and I can answer to this question more clearly then. Is it possible?
Definitely, please.
Thank you. All right. So these are the irades that they can have access to the palace, and yes, diplomats or lords, aristocrats, when they visit the palace, they could have access to the palace grounds and paid a visit to the treasury. And their perception is, it's interesting. We'll come to that. So here you can see who visited the palace. So this is part of my research, and I collected the archival data, trying to see which countries visited the Topkapi Palace the most. And you can see England, America, Russia, France, Germany. And the thing is, it's closed for Ottoman citizens. So Ottomans couldn't have entered the treasury or the Topkapi Palace as a visitor back then. We have three Ottoman visitors, but they are just accompanying foreign visitors at that time. Okay, so not only the imperial treasury, but other parts of the palace, its inner courts and sultanic pavilions were also included in the standardized palatial tour. The tour was specifically curated for the European gaze and included performative acts of display that mimicked the ancient palace rituals. During this choreographed tour, presenting the highlights of the Topkapi Palace, um, the Europeans proceeded through the courts and they moved from one kiosk to another, accompanied by a group of palace servants. Here you can see, for example, them in front of the middle gate. Even, uh, even though Ottomans aimed for impressing the visitors by showing them the most sacred parts of the palace, the memoirs of Europeans reflected a tone of disappointment. For example, in 1895, Clara Erskine Clement wrote that, quote, the former glory of the palace is now replaced by simple desolation. Kiosks, towers, and lattices are crumbling and falling. Gardens are neglected, vegetation is yellow and dirty, and no one is left to regret the beauty that has departed. End quote. Similarly, Barnett Miller, depicting the hosting ceremony, you can see the hosting ceremony at Mecidiye Köşk, compared it to an Arabian Nights entertainment with obvious Orientalist references. And finally, Edwin Grosvenor, after visiting the Topkapi Palace, said that, quote, yet, when all is seen, the impression left behind is one of blurred confusion and disappointment rather than admiration and surprise. Why is that? So they were kind of disappointed. But yet, the pinnacle of the tour was the visit to the imperial treasury, and that was believed to include the legendary riches of the Oriental despot. After the coffee and tobacco serving at the Mecidiye Pavilion, the group was invited to the entrance portico of the imperial treasury. The chief treasurer arrived with a group of palace pages and unlocked the door, unlocked the seal with certain royal ceremony. Once the doors were opened, the chief treasurer and the treasury pages took their positions, bowing and scraping inside the treasury chamber, and the visitors were able to have a quick glance at the collection under the surveillance of the palace officials, walking from one hall to another without enough time or light to examine them all. At that time, only three chambers were open for visits, and the centerpiece of the first chamber was the so-called Persian throne, which was in an octagonal glass cabinet. Here you can see it. So what was on display in the imperial treasury? Well, almost everything that had some kind of tangible or intangible value for Ottoman rulers. The items they once used, wear, slept in, eat at, gifts, things they found interesting, valuable, or worth keeping, from jewelry to thrones, costumes to cups, coins to paintings, cloaks to china, fabrics to parchments, arms and armors, gift boxes, glassware, silverware, etc. Basically, anything of value were densely organized in the treasury and shown to visitors in display cabinets, creating a sense of richness and prosperity through accumulation. So according to treasury registers of 1878, there were around 4,800 objects displayed in the cabinets of the imperial treasury. In the second chamber, the main attraction was the ceremonial robes of Ottoman sultans displayed in a chronological manner from Mehmet II to Mahmud II, representing the longevity and dynastic continuity of the Ottomans. However, the overall impact of the treasury was some sort of disappointment mixed with wonder and admiration. For instance, an article in Constantinople Illustrated depicts the treasury as a barbaric display of things of greatest value mixed in an ignorant and dirty fashion with a heap of modern riffraff. End quote. On the contrary, I argue that the whole display setting performed in the imperial treasury was purposefully designed to mimic the old palace rituals, and the sense of authenticity and oriental splendor was consciously reformulated for the Western gaze, performing the oriental self. So I think it's better for me to end here and not get into the details of the private chamber in terms of time limitations. Does it sound good for you?
Yes, that is. I'm afraid yes, we are running into time.
Yeah, because I might need another 10 minutes. It would be over time. So
I see. Then I guess yes, this would be the best place to kind of.
Yeah, and now I think I can answer your question much better, because
Yeah.
as you can see, yeah, during the 19th century, Ottoman sultans started living at their palaces, modern palaces by the Bosphorus, and they opened the palace grounds for visits to the Europeans, and they were hoping for an, Oriental luxury and exotism. They were trying to, discover the mysterious palace, see the harem ladies, etc. And maybe I can show you just one image, just a second before I um, finish my presentation. Sorry. Oh, yeah, here it is. So this is Jerome's painting on the right. This is a part where the Europeans visitors visited marble sofa, marmer sofa behind the privy chamber, and this is how they envisioned it. Like naked women and luxury and carpets and rich colors. There's music, probably opium, and the lazy ruler was sitting there. So this is how they imagined it would be. But this is an 18th century illustrated manuscript showing Ahmed III, throwing gold coins to his servants, and it's as you can see, very ceremonial, and there's some kind of dignity in there. So this is the two perceptions, um, two conflicting perceptions in the palace, where Europeans wanted to see the lost in Orientalism and authenticity, and on the other hand, Ottomans were showing them a reflection of the glorious past and ceremonial. Okay. So I think I can stop
Well, thank you very
sharing.
much for answering my question. Now we will move on to the general question Q&A for the rest of the audience. Throughout the link we posted in the chat at the beginning of the presentations, we have got a couple of questions that I would proceed now to ask. Now, first we have a question for you, Senija. So it's kind of something you talked about, and someone very clearly observed very nicely for your presentation. It says, the question says, I've noticed that there are churches and synagogues in addition to mosques in Sarajevo built during the Ottoman Empire. What does this show about the conquests, and did the Ottomans really appreciate other cultures and regions as said in books and documents?
Thank you for the question. Well, that depends on who the ruler, who the sultan was at that time. But in most of the time, there was quite the conviviality within the region. So we can say yes, because it was organized in those millet systems, as we all we know about, and there was was an autonomy for all the religions, and that's something what I really like about the way how it's presented in current days. It's the churches, synagogues, and mosques are presented as one big circuit. They are presenting together in relation to one to another. They're not presented as separately. You go to the mosque, you go to the synagogue, you go to the church, but you present them in a kind of a way that they reflect on one another, because they are actually the context of a particular time of, and that's why it's quite important for the country, the Ottoman heritage as such, to be presented as such. This syncretic narrative is quite present in the city, and it's been shown to the visitors as such.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think that was quite clarifying for the question, and quite nice to do in your presentation as well. I think we do have another question for you before we move on to Dr. Ozlu. Someone said, during my visit in Bosnia, I've been repeatedly told how the Bosnians felt betrayed by Croatians and Serbians. In Albania, there's a hate towards their Christian neighbors. And the question would like to ask, are these relationships due to the centuries-long religious conflicts between Christians and Muslims, or was there specific actions by the Ottoman Empire that has left this kind of inherent frozen conflict that's sparked right now?
I would love to speak about this question for next 2 hours. So that's a very strong question, because we have the conquerors and the conquested in the same kind of a context. So the Christian boys, for instance, in the Ottoman Empire, were taken to Topkapi Palace, as we can have seen. And then they came back as rulers, but they're from there. So that's a lot of complexity and syncretism in this particular context. So a lot of hatred is not primordial, but it is something what happened in the war in the 90s, and then the stories have been pulled out of some kind of a reworked, rescheduled, reworked, and spoken and such. And not that everyone thinks in such a way. My kind of a feeling is that it's around 50% of the people who feel a bit more syncretism and more love towards one another than anything else. Like I can't actually number. It's bad to say the number, but I can say that there is a lot of love as well on one side, but the hate is a bit louder, so that sometimes you can't see what is underneath by just going it on the surface. And that's one of the tour guides I interviewed. She said, "Well, I really don't have time to speak more profoundly about the relationships of that in that time, so I have to do very quickly something what people understand." So that really focuses quite well on what you said.
Senija, may I ask something here? I wonder, okay, the tour guides just, go through the basics, but what about the tourists? Do they have an appetite for the, Ottoman heritage, or
Yes.
do they want to learn more about it?
Probably the same as your gaze towards the Topkapi Palace is the same kind of a way of devouring the Orient, which is not the Orient of Europe, but we can peek a little bit to see how it is, like some kind of a forbidden fruit. We have, and then we have that kind of a context context as well. So there is a lot of interest as well. Although in my last visit was 4 years ago, and it was still quite the first story they hear is about the conflict, the war in the 90s in Albania, in North Macedonia in 2000, and then in Bosnia in the 90s. But then when you go beyond, when you go more in deep, then you see like that the countries existed before the 90s. There's a lot of heritage.
Well, I mean, that
Yeah.
was a really nice question too. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
doing that little bouncing off of each other. Well, we have 2 more questions from our audience. They're not as necessarily directly aimed at the presentations, they haven't been worded towards a specific presenter. So I'll just ask them in general, and whichever one of you would like to answer it, feel free. So we have maybe this one's a bit more of a, I say, different question, saying it's what would have happened if the Ottomans conquered Vienna? How would this shape European history? That might have been a bit too broad. So if that's okay with you as well, I might want to skip that question just because it might be a bit out of focus and a bit too broad. There is one question about multiculturalism. This key theme of this talk is the question goes: how influential was multiculturalism in the emergence of a nationalist/patriotic ideology employed by the members of the Committee of Union and Progress in the late Ottoman Empire? If any of you would like to answer that, maybe.
Who will go first?
Please go ahead, and I'll try to complete as much as I could.
I'll do as much as I could, because it's not clearly my expertise. But basically, that was what was happening. This whole romantic ideas of nationalism, and which actually, as being modern nation, being one nation, that was actually in that didn't work well with this idea of multi-religious place. And we have seen it also not only in Ottoman Empire, with Ottoman Empire, but also with Austro-Hungarian Empire, which also later on also fall. There is this kind of a multiculturalism and nationalism binary, because if you want to be a modern nation in the 19th century, you have to be a nation, and there is no space for multiculturalism. And we have seen it also in other countries of the Ottoman Empire, that idea of nationhood has really devoured devoured the people quite significantly. And if I can add to 1482 Spain, which was again in the 15th century, there was a multinational, multicultural country. But in order to be a bit more kind of a country in more terms of like oneness, some of the religions have been secondary, and lots of people fled the country. So that's a strong essence of multiculturalism and nationalism dichotomy here. I hope I was able to answer at least a bit.
I think it was a great start, Senija, and let me continue. I mean, I do agree that the 19th century was the period where cosmopolitanism and nationalism goes hand in hand. So that it was a very, very cosmopolitan, actually very global world. You know, we can see the shifts of people and cultures and languages, especially within the Mediterranean. So when we have a look at the 19th century, I think it's much more cosmopolitan and much more global than today's world. But at the same time, the ideas of nationalism was emerging, and it was really very powerful. But an empire, by definition, is an like umbrella institution where multi-ethnic and multicultural, multi-religious groups were under this organization and paying taxes. So it's not today's understanding of nations. The millets were a little bit different, but I think it all started for the Ottoman case with the Greek Revolution in 1821. I think we are kind of celebrating, or it's not, I wouldn't say celebrating, but I think it's the second 100th anniversary of their independence. And it was a big shock for the Ottomans, because suddenly one of their loyal members of the Ottoman Empire just declared their independence as a separate group. And I think it kind of triggered the idea of Tanzimat, where they have to give some rights, equal rights to all groups of all religions. So, and when it comes to the period of Ittihat and Teraki, Committee of Union and Progress, I think there was this Bulgarian revolts and the revolts of the later Arabs and the Greeks and the Armenians, etc. So I think it became like a reflex for the empire to develop its own Turkish identity. At least this is what the scholars suggest. I'm not an expert, but it's like a chain reaction to these, nationalist events happening within the scope of the empire. If I could make myself clear.
Okay, I'm very sorry for leaving there. My computer just blue screened, so I had to reboot everything. I guess this is the fate of Zoom calls at some point. We can't really just continue on. You can't really blue screen in real life, but I guess this is a problem in these discussions. Well, I think that's the end of our questions coming from our audience. I don't know if anybody else has any questions right now they would like to ask, and seeing that we are kind of coming to the end of our allocated time, a little bit off the allocated time actually, and especially seeing maybe some people have other business to attend to, we might be coming to the end of this panel discussion. And at this point, I'd like to thank both of our speakers. These presentations have been great, and all the questions you've answered to the Q&A, I found them very entertaining and nice. And I think we do have I think we have a hand up. Let me actually give the floor to maybe one last question, if that's okay with both of you. Okay, the floor is yours, Vedat.
I just wanted to say thank you. It wasn't a hand up, and I would like to say thank you. Thank you.
I think he was clapping.
Maybe my computer hasn't recovered completely yet then. In that case then, if there aren't any other final questions, I will now hand over the floor to our president to conclude this discussion. You are muted.
I'm sorry. Ms. Özlem, Ms. Causevic, thank you for joining us with this panel. And for our audience, thank you all for tuning in with us and listening to this lovely conversation. We will be uploading a video of this to the YouTube channel for our UCL Turkish Society. So if you have any other questions, or if you want to just check back, you can go to our YouTube channel and check our video. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. We like to see you on our next events. Thank you, Ms. Özlem. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Very
interesting event.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.